Testing 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everybody. Hey, good morning, letting people in. Good morning.
Hey.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
How are you feeling, Rosemary?
Much better today. Thank you.
You sound much better.
Yes, I feel much better.
You're back in the land of the living.
Back in the land of the living. Good place to be.
Yeah. What's the weather like there today?
Sunny, a little cool, 48 degrees.
All right. It's not raining.
Not raining. I can see, well, yesterday I could see snow outside. Not right here, but on the mountains.
Yeah. Some beautiful hillsides right now. And it was a cold time to walk the dog.
Yes, I wish I could teach my dog to wipe his own feet.
Yeah. we had that too.
He will at least wait patiently on the doormat for me to do it instead of like running into the house. But
we had a lot of mess. Dog from dog footprints, which I guess we never had to deal with that for years and years. Right. But he didn't want to go out, so it's not like he went out the doggy door, but yeah, when we took him in and out of the house, it was.
Are you ready to say hi, Rabbi?
So I think we'll give everybody a couple of minutes. Oh, hey, how are you, Jonah? Joda, hello. Hi. Yeah. He's our youngest participant. He's going to have read the whole Bible by the time he's 6 or 7. He's going to have read the entire Bible.
That's cool. Including the parts that 6 or 7-year-olds don't usually hear.
Correct. That's even.
Well, Mary learned how to read the Bible.
Oh, there's Judith, who's even further west than
Than I am.
than Rosemary.
Yes.
So we got Rosemary's weather report. Judith, what's your weather report like?
Hang on. Right now, we're gorgeous, but it's supposed to start raining again about 4.
Oh, wow. Wow.
What
Well,
happened with yours? Are you going to get more rain? Am I coming in?
we'll discuss that later. That's one of the reasons I wanted to get everyone's weather report and everyone's health report too. We've got yeah, just so you know, the post-Israel COVID report was rather high. I mean, fortunately, nobody got that sick. And Rosemary, Rosemary does not have to take any, there's no responsibility, credit, whatever for
Is
this
it, I wasn't the index case.
it depends. Now that I think about it, it could have passed through other people, but in that sense, who knows where
Yeah.
if that's the case, then we can all trace it back to Wuhan. But anyways, in the
Yes.
yeah, it's hard to know. But yes, we definitely had some people that came back. As I mentioned, it was an interesting study in social behavior in the age of COVID, because I think I mentioned this last week, or I definitely mentioned it to some people. I bought 20 kits when Rosemary came down
When I tested positive,
yes, she tested positive. We got someone in the hotel to give her a test,
a rapid test.
which was great. And then I went out and got, and by the way, we just assumed that it was correct. I mean, it was. I mean, it's not like you know.
I tested again when I got home and it was still positive. So
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that's what I had.
Yeah, we could have
I
tested.
didn't, according to, now it's interesting that Israel does not count a rapid test as official. So I did report it to the Ministry of Health, but they told me that unless I got a PCR test, I didn't officially have it.
Right. Well, yeah. Anyways, we assumed and Rosemary was definitely not feeling well. So no matter what, it was better for her to be at home. But
Yes.
the point that I was going to make is we got 20 kits. We gave Elisa Caswell, her roommate, a test immediately. She turned out negative, which really was not an effective test because we should have tested her every day, or at least for a couple more days, but we didn't. We could have. I had the 20 test kits the whole rest of the time. I think we used 2 more the entire time, and I offered them to everybody. And so the answer is that
People didn't want to know.
yeah, that's the answer. No, I mean, honestly, that was the,
mean,
that's the
I'm high
takeaway.
risk, so I felt I should get tested, and then because I wanted to be on Paxlovid if I was high risk. So that's basically why I came home, was to be sure I could get it.
Right.
And the interesting, again, if I'm a sociologist and my research experiment would have proven is that point, which is that people didn't want to know. People in that
didn't want to know.
circumstance don't want to know. So that's all I can tell you. My field observation is that, and it makes sense. I mean, there's nothing about that should surprise anyone or make anyone question humanity. It just tells you that, and again, I maybe if it's a more life-threatening type of disease or something, maybe people would have had a different reaction. So I don't
Rabbi,
extrapolate out of that. Yeah.
a lot of us didn't ask you for the tests because we had our own.
That's a good point. So yeah, that is true. So well, hold it. Let me put it this way. Some people, I don't know if I would say many would imply that more than 50% had it. There were some people who had it for sure. Not as many as maybe you would have thought, or I would have thought. I don't know. I didn't take one with me. So maybe I had it in the past, taken them when we traveled. Maybe my wife took them. She's better at that kind of stuff than I am. But yeah, there were fewer people that tested while they were there than than you would have thought. And you're right, they could have bought a test too if they didn't want to come out and say, hey, I want to give me a test. But yeah, two people wanted tests. So, but I get it. I understand I understand why the default position for a lot of people was not wanting to know. Because then they're forced to then decide what do they do for themselves, for the rest of the group. And the consequences that come from that. But anyways, we had a wonderful trip. Again, for those who we're not going to belabor it because we talked about it last time, but I'm still in the glow of telling people that I got back from Israel last week. Now it's actually 8 days ago, so I have to say almost a week ago, but definitely still glowing. And it's not an illness, it's not COVID, it's just natural or spiritual glow. And all I can tell you is whenever Reverend Lynn wants to go, I'll go back. We'll go back with Reverend Lynn. We had a great time with John Shaver, who's broke off from he's a Methodist. So they're kind of a breakaway from the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church, but Reverend Lynn would also be a wonderful travel companion and person to see Israel.
It was wonderful.
But
I went in January and it snowed.
But you've been, yeah. John
Snowed in Jerusalem.
Yes, that's
Snowed in Jerusalem.
This
We've been
time
there
it
once.
poured in Jerusalem.
We were once there for an and we were there for a rainstorm. But after the rain, it was fine. But it was. And how are you feeling, Reverend Lynn?
Okay, I'm just tired of my arm in a sling and can't drive.
What are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. I had a shoulder replacement
Oh.
the end of November, and I was doing very well. And then all of a sudden I was having pain. And it turns out I have a stress fracture now in that shoulder, which hurt a lot more than the surgery. So I see the doctor on Friday. So I hope I get a clean bill of health and can go back to PT. So
Oh no, I had
I'm not very patient.
I
I
had
get annoyed.
shoulder surgery a few years ago, and I'll tell you that's one of the most painful because you can't sleep. You can't sleep.
Right.
And then
I slept sitting up for a long time.
not good. Not good.
But
I'm sorry.
no.
All
Thank
right,
you.
so feel better. Be on the road to recovery. I wish today's passages of Isaiah would be uplifting and make you feel healthy. Last week we would have loved to have had you because we read this wonderful line about a child will lead you, and we read that from chapter 9 and then a little bit from chapter 11. Today we're actually going to be reading the Isaiah's chapters. These chapters today are Isaiah's, I would say, rants, but they're prophecies, pronouncements, different translations for what Isaiah does in today, and we're going to get it done today as a unit. It's Isaiah's speeches against other nations. And we actually start with a biggie. We start with, let me just get this up on Facebook. We start with Isaiah's pronouncements against the Babylonians, which is interesting because it is the Babylonians were the up and coming empire. Isaiah was dealing with the Assyrians, and now he's dealing with the Babylonians. And we actually also will see the Persians mentioned and some other peoples. But the fact that Israel is at this time, Israel, and actually at any time, is at best a second tier. I was going to say second rate. It's not a second rate we're not a second-rate people, but we're a second-rate power, and maybe a third-rate power. I'd say second-rate in the region at least. And so we don't, for us to be talking about the Assyrians and Babylonians, it's really looking at them as on another level to us, but yet Isaiah seems to have no issue talking about them in a way, as you're going to see, that brings them down and definitely makes them feel like you don't have to be worried about them. The first couple chapters are going to be the Babylonians, and we're going to read about some of these other nations. Some of the nations are powerful, like the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Persians. And some of them are the more regional powers, like the Moabites, the Ammonites, those the Philistines, some of the people that live in the region that are those second tier powers, more usually a vassal state to these bigger empires. So in Isaiah, I don't know if you'd always know how powerful the nation is, because the pronouncements against them are they're mixed up. They're not in order of like strongest to weakest. And we do consider these all part of the first Isaiah. These are not the second Isaiah, the Isaiah that we find in the latter half of the book, that would have been after the Babylonian exile, and then taking in consideration a different political landscape where you have different powers. The Assyrians are already long gone by the time of second Isaiah. So let's take a look at these. There are some famous lines in these passages that have been repurposed. Let's say that, in the sense that just like the Isaiah prophecies about a child being born were clearly about King Hezekiah, the prophecies that we have about the Babylonians have been repurposed for the Babylonians, and they've been during different times. They've been repurposed for Romans and other enemies of the Jewish people, and they've been repurposed till today. And by that I mean that when we were fighting a war with Iraq, some of the Iraq stuff goes back 30 years, believe it or not. We're early 90s, but also through the 2000s, people were still mining these prophecies, because Babylonia, of course, is Bavel, the capital of the Babylonian Empire. Bavel is underneath Baghdad. So it's the same place. And so people said, hey, that's not a coincidence. So let's take a look at these. Rosemary, if you'd be so kind as to lead us in these prophecies against the nations in these chapters.
The Babylon pronouncement, a prophecy of Isaiah, son of Amoz. Raise a standard upon a bare hill, cry aloud to them, wave a hand, and let them enter the gates of the nobles. I have summoned my purified guests to execute my wrath. Behold, I have called my stalwarts, my proudly exultant ones.
Yeah, so this is the introduction to this prophecy. The very first line, again, was most likely, you can kind of see put on by an editor, redactor. But it starts off with kind of a battle cry, if you will, and a battle cry against the Babylonians. You'll see how we start to, it's clear that it's Babylonia, but as of right now, it's kind of like, could be anybody.
Hark, a tumult on the mountains as of a mighty force. Hark, an uproar of kingdoms, nations assembling. The Lord of hosts is mustering a host for war. They come from a distant land, from the end of the sky, the Lord with the weapons of his wrath to ravage all the earth. Howl, for the day of the Lord is near. It shall come like havoc from Shaddai. Therefore, all hands shall grow limp, and all men's hearts shall sink. And overcome by terror, they shall be seized by pangs and throes, writhe like a woman in travail. They shall gaze at each other in horror, their faces livid with fright. Lo, the day of the Lord is coming with pitiless fury and wrath, to make the earth a desolation, to wipe out the sinners upon it.
Yeah. So you can see that this is a battle cry. It's setting a tone for horrendous battles. You can understand why this is frightening. It's pretty obvious it's frightening, but you can also see why it continues to frighten and scare people to this day. And when people look at prophecies of destruction, this is kind of the first time that obviously in the book of Leviticus and in Deuteronomy, we see curses and we see bad things happening. But the way Isaiah paints it as a battlefield and as in this type of destruction, it's not just simply a curse or a warning. This is a descriptive and poetic and very powerful description of a world that is not a fun place to live. And I think I made this point last week, that this is retained in the back of our minds, and it always exists, because whether we see this as an act of God or the zombie apocalypse, we never stop thinking about this. In the back of our minds, it's always there. So, I obviously I don't need to say this, but I will. There's a reason why The Last of Us is one of the most powerful and popular shows on TV right now, because people have this in the back of their mind, this horror of what the world looks like when it comes to an end. And Isaiah is in the midst of giving us that right now.
What relationship does this have to, like, the cursed tablets? I was reading about how common they were and how they came from Mesopotamia.
Yeah, well, there's definitely other versions of this, and it's not just in Mesopotamia. It's in Ugarit. It's in the Canaanite descriptions. The Babylonian ones and the Mesopotamian ones, Sumerian ones, going back to the beginning of writing. That's an important point, Gail, that like the earliest writings we found, even earlier than Isaiah, have these kinds of cataclysmic, apocalyptic ends to the world or to the earth, and sometimes it was projected backwards to the flood, but even in these ancient texts, it's projected into the future. So, I think it's a common. There's a common, I think, human, a human vision of this. I don't know, I haven't studied apocalyptic texts as much in other cultures, and the comparisons to other cultures, but there does seem to be some similarities to specifically the text you're talking about. As we uncovered them and as we made comparisons in the last 150, 200 years, people have said, oh wow, this is very similar to these Akkadian and Sumerian texts. But look, it seems as though almost every culture has a story about the end of the world. Judaism has actually, I think, in the last 2,000 years, kind of not had that at the front of our consciousness. I think Christianity, to some extent, kind of took over and made it, so much a part of the religion that, to some extent, maybe we step back from it. But it's in our Bible. This will not be the only place we see these kinds of visions of war and destruction, sometimes against us and sometimes against the people that have or were going to do it to us, which is what you're going to see here. So
a couple of novels that I've read just recently, sort of post-apocalyptic. One of the best was Cormac McCarthy, of The Road.
Yeah.
Oh, it's elegantly written and it's terrifying and devastating. And the other is by Butler, Octavia Butler, The Parable of the Sower. Have any of you read any of those?
Yes.
I've read The
terrible.
Road, and they made that into a movie too with Viggo Mortensen.
It's been made into a movie?
Yeah, Viggo Mortensen started as the man.
Oh,
It's pretty good. But yeah, it's very dark and it's scary and it's just
yeah, but it's also elegantly written.
Yeah,
It's
it's very-
fascinating.
yeah, he's a scary writer, and he's
Yeah.
scary because he's so good and he's so scary. But yeah, he's the guy who wrote No Country for Old Men too, which is pretty scary.
Right.
He's a great writer.
Which
And I
is
think he
pretty
wrote
scary.
something else that I looked at and picked up, and I'm like, I'm sure this is too scary, but I just picked it up at Barnes and Noble and I put it down. I didn't want to touch it. I'd give me nightmares. But yeah, he gives me nightmares. But yeah, it's if you want to read a great, probably the best post-apocalyptic book, it's The Road. But yeah, it's kind of the standard. It's the standard of like, if you write write a scary book, a post-apocalyptic, and just write it really well. Anyways, but it seems to be that these are narratives that are common to people around the world. Somebody has argued, I forget who it was, I don't know if it was Campbell or somebody, that we all have birth narratives, we have an Exodus narrative, and we have an apocalypse narrative. Every culture has it, every group has it, every person has it. How we live, how we got to where we are, our journey, and then how this all ends. And so the Isaiah texts, it's difficult to know how much effect they had on us and how much they had on Western civilization. They had a lot more effect than the Babylonian ones did, the Mesopotamian ones did on their end, other than the fact that, again, maybe they were where some of this stuff came from. But we get it, we got it from our sources, and then of course it went into the Christian sources. All right, so let's take a look at how, you'll see probably some stuff in here that sounds familiar.
The stars and constellations of heaven shall not give off their light. The sun shall be dark when it rises, and the moon shall diffuse no glow. And I will requite to the world its evil, and to the wicked their iniquity. I will put an end to the pride of the arrogant, and humble the haughtiness of tyrants. I will make people scarcer than fine gold, and men than gold of Ophir.
Yeah, and that is another one of those texts that doesn't say Jews, it doesn't say Israel, it doesn't say, your country, it says everybody. I will make people scarcer than fine gold, men gold of Ophir, which is again the biblical poetry, the doublet style of basically saying most people are going to get wiped out. So that's not us, that's everybody.
Therefore shall heaven be shaken and earth leap out of its place at the fury of the Lord of hosts on the day of his burning wrath. Then, like gazelles that are chased, and like sheep that no man gathers, each man shall turn back to his people. They shall flee, every one to his land. All who remain shall be pierced through. All who are caught shall fall by the sword. And their babes shall be dashed to pieces in their sight. Their homes shall be plundered, and their wives shall be raped.
Yeah, and by the way, that's not for kids. I mean, that's when we talk about, like, what is in the Bible, some stuff like this, which is pretty scary. It's a
Not safe for work.
it's pretty horrific.
Behold, I stir up the Medes against them who do not value silver or delight in gold. Their bows shall shatter the young. They shall show no pity to infants. They shall not spare the children.
Yeah, and there we have the first indication that these are the Babylonians. Like, up until now, it could be anybody. Up until now, I mean, maybe there's some clues that people who know about the Babylonians might have said, oh, maybe that's why it says this here. Maybe it's a play on words. That's the key right there. Ed Madai, the Medes. So the Medians are, again, in Persia and the Mesopotamian area. The Persians and the Medians are the people who eventually destroy Babylonia. So this is the key, that those people are the ones who are going to destroy Babylonia. Okay. And you can't negotiate with them, right? It's like the Terminator, they can't be stopped. You can't negotiate with them, they'll stop until you are dead. So that is pretty scary stuff.
And Babylon, glory of kingdoms, proud splendor of the Chaldeans, shall become like Sodom and Gomorrah, overturned by God. Never more shall it be settled, nor dwelt in through all the ages. No Arab shall pitch his tent there, no shepherds make flocks lie down there.
Yeah, well, there flat out, it told you it was Babel, it was Babylonia. It says Babel, and it also says Chaldea, Kasdim. It's clearly the Babylonians. And then it compares them, though, Babylonian and Chaldea, the area, to Sodom and Gomorrah, which we know were destroyed by God. And so it has Sodom and Amorah. So Amorah, the English, whatever pronunciation of it came out as Gomorrah, which is why it's Gomorrah, but it's Amorah in Hebrew. And how do we know it's a place where people won't even go? Not even Arabs will pitch a tent there, which is an interesting word. It's one of the few times in the Bible that we actually see the word Aravi used for Arabs, right? The Arabs are actually singled out here as a people, not just Ishmaelites, not just some of the other people in the area, Sheba, or some of the other areas that might be Arabs. Here it flat out calls them Aravi. So here is one of the earliest references to Arabs that we have in the Bible. Chronologically, which tells us that, again, Arabs would pitch tents in places, right? They are nomadic people at this point. But yeah, even they won't come near it. And look who else won't come near it.
But beasts shall lie down there, and the houses be filled with owls. There shall ostriches make their home, and there shall satyrs dance.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
Yeah.
Well,
I
keep
think we
going.
believed in satyrs.
Keep going.
And jackals shall abide in its castles, and dragons in the palaces of pleasure. Her hour is close at hand. Her days will not be long.
Yeah, so there's a lot of people that kind of focus on these words because, again, we're not 100% sure that this word refers to jackals. And we're not 100% that Tanim are dragons necessarily, but it's a possibility. And it's also a possibility that the Se'arim are maybe not satyrs. Now, somebody throw down some of the translations that they have for satyr for at the end of 21 or for 22. Anybody want to give me, they got different stuff? I know you got different stuff out there.
For 22, I've got wild beasts,
Yep. And what do you have for 21?
satyrs.
Oh, you do? Okay. So the King James decided to use satyrs. Anybody else want to hit me with a New Revised Standard Version has?
Hyenas,
Yeah.
hyenas,
Hyenas for jackals, but what about for satyrs? Is that-
satyrs.
Oh, they do? No one has anything besides satyrs?
Mm-mm.
Huh. Nobody? Yeah, we're not 100% sure, but let's explain why. I'm going to give you what some of the other not that I want to dwell on this one word, but let's see. I've got, I'll tell you what some of them have. I've got wild goats. No one has wild goats for instead of satyr? Nobody? That's the this is the NIV, which is a good translation. They said they have wild goats. let's see what the New Revised Standard Version has. Let's go to let's see what the New Revised Standard Version has. They have goat demons. Look at that one. There you got both. You get goats and satyrs together, goat demons. Yeah, the point is that what makes us want to come up with a better look, the word se'arim are goats. Oftentimes they use the word for goat. Okay. Se'arim, the word se'ir in Hebrew is a goat, flat out. The problem is, and this is why it's usually why the King James and why other translations have the word satyr, is this word, yirakdu. Goats usually don't dance. The word raked means to dance. So you can have them leaping about. Because we read actually in the Psalms, it says, in B'tzeit Yisrael, we read in the hills dance like gazelle, that animals do dance.
My
But
dog dances.
yeah, so some animals do. But we don't we don't usually say that goats dance, but I guess they do. They could. So some people liked the idea that these are goat demons or satyrs, animal human mixes.
It's a Joni Mitchell song. He did the goat dance very well.
Yes, that's true. There's a reference actually to a goat dance. So again, it seems as though these are all things that only happen when people are gone. And what happens when a place has been left in ruins. These are all things, and again, it's very descriptive. I mean, that's why I'm pausing on this a little bit, is because when people are gone, this is what happens to the places. So sometimes even there'll be translations for the word owls. Some people might not have owls there for the word ochim right here. Some people might have other words besides, maybe wild beasts, not necessarily owls. But again, these are what, like when an area becomes a ghost town, that's what happens. Jackals, hyenas, maybe dragons, maybe satyrs. They're not places that you want to be around. And it's obviously a very descriptive. It's very descriptive to that destruction. I will say this is the end of the chapter. It's not really the end of the pronouncement. It's maybe like, well, we'll keep reading and you'll see why. It's not really the end of the Babylonian pronouncement, if you will. It's kind of the end of an idea because it's going to shift back to us now, but it's not really the end of the whole prophecy, as you'll see. Let's keep going.
But the Lord will pardon Jacob and will again choose Israel and will settle them on their own soil. And strangers shall join them and shall cleave to the house of Jacob. For peoples shall take them and bring them to their homeland, and the house of Israel shall possess them as slaves and handmaids on the soil of the Lord. They shall be the captors of their captors and masters to their taskmasters.
So it's a flip. The people that took us captive will now be our captives. That's weird. That's weird. Guess what? Guess what? Some people think that's exactly what's just happened in Israel over the last 75 years.
Yes, yes.
So what does it mean? Well, for people who say Israel is returned, and strangers shall join them and shall cleave to the house of Jacob. I've seen this prophecy used. Well, I'm not going to point out who's been using it, but there are groups that have used it as justification for, or as prophetic pronouncement on why more evangelical Christians have joined them and cleaved to the house of Jacob. Different translations kind of give you a more, well, a less poetic version of that. But again, this idea that that'll happen, and this idea that, again, there's a justification for turning the people who were your captors into now serving you, can be seen as a justification for the political situation that Israel's in today. So, for example, I'm just telling you what happens, and this does happen. And it's real for some people, to the extent that there are people who say, look, for much of the last 1400 years, the Jewish people were subservient, in a subservient position since about 650, 700, been in a subservient position to the Muslims. For most of the last 1400 years, much of the last 1400 years, Israel's been under the control of the Arab and then Ottoman dynasties, with a small lapse during the glorious years of the Crusaders for 100 years. We were, Israel at least, was under the domination of Muslims. Okay. Do you understand now what some people see has happened? So it depends on how you read this. And there are 100% people who read this as a
Therefore, it's justified.
Yeah. And so the Bible says it. And so it's justified. So this is how it's read by some people, not everybody, not everybody. Please, I'm not saying everybody reads it, but there are people who 100% read this along those lines. And you can see why. I mean, it's there for you to see. And so for people who believe that these words continue to be played out, they were played out 2,500 years ago, they were played out somewhat during the Roman period, or people believed it was going to happen, and then it's being played out today. Okay, so that's, I mean, everything. I mean, I don't need to say it again. I mean, that's if people look at how can someone justify it, that's how they justify it. I'm not saying it's right. I don't think it's right, but I want to tell you that there are people who see this as that's what's being played out. So you know, if you think, well, why are I don't want to, I'm just going to say it and then we'll move on. If you say, well, why could an Arab today, citizen of Israel today, be seen as a second-class citizen? Well, that's why. Because they're slaves and handmaids. And if they're treated anything better than a slave or handmaid, it's already an upgrade. I mean, that's not, I'm not saying that's okay. It's not okay. I'm just telling you that's the mindset that some people are in. It's not okay, but that's what happens. All right.
And when the Lord has given you rest from your sorrow and trouble, and from the hard service that you were made to serve, you shall recite this song of scorn over the king of Babylon. How is the taskmaster vanished? How is oppression ended? The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the rod of tyrants, that smote peoples in wrath with strokes unceasing, that belabored nations in fury in relentless pursuit. All the earth is calm, untroubled, loudly it cheers. Even pines rejoice at your fate, and cedars of Lebanon. Now that you have lain down, none shall come up to fell us.
So you can see why this is still about Babylon. So when it says right here, this is recite the scorn over the king of Babylon, that's the indication that this is all part of the same pronouncement. Israel's coming back, Israel's restoration comes on the backs of the Babylonians and on all those who went to war against us. And the taskmaster is vanquished and is vanished, is done, and everything is happy. Even the land, even the trees are happy, even below the earth.
Sheol below was astir to greet your coming, rousing for you the shades of all earth chieftains, rising from their thrones, all the kings of nations, all speak up and say to you, so you have been stricken as we were, you have become like us. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, and the strains of your lutes. Worms are to be your bed, maggots your blanket. How are you fallen from heaven, O shining one, son of dawn? How are you felled to earth, O vanquisher of nations?
Yeah, so this is the Babylonians. You thought you were untouchable. You thought you were in charge of everything, and you have been brought low. And so Israel is brought up, the Babylonians are brought down.
Once you thought in your heart, I will climb to the sky, higher than the stars of God. I will set my throne. I will sit in the Mount of Assembly, on the summit of Zaphon. I will mount the back of a cloud. I will match the Most High.
Yeah, and if you read that, I will sit in the Mount of Assembly on the summit of Zaphon. That sounds a lot like, hello,
Mount
Sounds a lot
Olympus.
like Mount Olympus. Sounds a lot like Mount Olympus, right? So, up in the high mountains of Zaphon, the high mountains in the north, like Mount Hermon and the mountains in the Lebanon. Yeah, sounds a lot like Olympus. So Babylonians, you thought you could get up there. You thought you could get up to heaven, right? Like Icarus, right? You thought you could ascend to the heavens.
Instead, you are brought down to Sheol, to the bottom of the pit. They who behold you stare. They peer at you closely. Is this the man who shook the earth, who made realms tremble, who made the world like a waste and wrecked its towns, who never released his prisoners to their homes? All the kings of nations were laid, every one in honor, each in his tomb, while you were left lying unburied, like loathsome carrion, like a trampled corpse in the clothing of slain, gashed by the sword, who sink to the very stones of the pit. You shall not have a burial like them, because you destroyed your country, murdered your people. Let the breed of evildoers never more be named. Prepare a slaughtering block for his sons because of the guilt of their father. Let them not arise to possess the earth. Then the world's face shall be covered with towns. I will rise up against them, declares the Lord of hosts, and will wipe out from Babylon name and remnant, kith and kin, declares the Lord.
Yeah, and that's pretty good indication that that's a pronouncement. That's a pretty good indication that, again, this is all part of God's pronouncement against the Babylonians. Again, very descriptive, just as we have a description of the battles and the waste of that. We also have a very descriptive account of their fall. And within that, there's some interesting pieces that we just read, that this place we call Sheol, the netherworld, seems to be a place down below and a place where there are ghosts. The question of Does everyone go there? Is that a place where everyone is for a time? Are there people who are always down there? Is that a place where part of you is, and part of you somewhere else? All of these are difficult to construct from the references that we have there, but we definitely have some references of Sheol that are indication that this is a place where there are dead people. And we definitely see dead people. It seems as though partly it's not very good. There's maggots down there. There's
Are the maggots dead or alive?
darkness. I don't know. You're right. I don't. They're dead maggots. No, it's not good. No matter what. No matter what, Rosemary, it's not good. It's not a good place to be. It's interesting because Samuel, we read, gets called up by King Saul, and he comes out of Sheol, and it's not pleasant. He didn't like it, which begs the question: why is Samuel in hell? Like, is he in hell? Is Sheol a place where he's at because he hasn't gone up to heaven yet? I mean, like, we don't really know. There's not enough to go on there to extract what's going on. I look, at the very least, when people say, does the Bible talk about an afterlife? It does. It's in very few places, and this is one of those places where there are reference to it. Does not give us a very comprehensive understanding of it. It's definitely not described in detail. And the references are enough to accumulate enough information to say that it doesn't seem like it's a good place, and it doesn't seem like maybe it's the only place, but it does leave us with some information. I will tell you that there's still an important idea within some faiths, including, by the way, Seventh-day Adventism, which I'm familiar with because we've lived with a Seventh-day Adventist for many, many years. Seventh-day Adventists believe that when you die, you go to a netherworld until the resurrection, and everybody's there. Every person until the resurrection is in that Sheol, is in this place that's just described. And it's not that you're bad or good. It's just everyone's there until resurrection, until the time of resurrection, which is kind of scary a little bit, but I'm not gonna, I mean, that's my take on it, but it's kind of like a netherworld that, you're kind of sleeping in until you're resurrected. And it's kind of based on the literal reading of the Bible, which seems to give us that kind of afterlife. So that's a little bit there. And again, there's not much. I mean, it's, it basically says, this is, the opposite of kind of where you think you'd want to be, So,
hey, Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
If you back up to satyrs, did you happen to bring that up and focus on goats, because goats have horns like the devil, so it dovetails into this?
Yeah, we mentioned this actually, John, when we were at up just a couple weeks ago, up at a beautiful place called Caesar Philippi. Caesar Philippi is known as the Banyas today, the springs, right? They were called Panias after the satyr god Pan. And Pan was worshipped there, and Pan was worshipped in many places because he was the god of the springs. He was the god of the shepherds. He was a god who loved beautiful women. He loved the nymphs. He was always accompanied by the nymphs. And so satyrs, and specifically Pan as the head satyr, was very, very popular in worship across the Greco-Roman world, across Europe. We found sites for Pan worship everywhere. So where the word panic actually comes from too. Pandemonium. Pan parties were popular, being like Pan. you had the little horn, the little pipes of Pan, you blew the flute, and the people dug it. They dug it so much that when early Christians were creating what the devil was, the devil had to be Pan. Why? Because they had to make the religion of the Pan followers the absolute worst because they were very popular. And so Pan became what the devil looked like and was the devil. So there is no original understanding of the reason why the JPS I showed you says satyr is because satyr isn't necessarily a demon. Once you start seeing the word goat demon used or demon at all used, that's what it was. And by the way, I just want to point out, some of you know this, the word demon was not always a bad thing. The word daemon is not, it became a negative and it became satanic, but originally a daemon was not an evil force. Like if I tell people that today, they're like, well, what difference does it make? Everyone knows a demon is bad. That's not what the word means in Greek. So these words became co-opted by the church to be the things that you weren't supposed to do. So that JPS purposely didn't translate it as goat demon because it's not probably what it was. It was either a goat or it was a goat, or it was a goat-like being like a satyr that was human enough to dance. I don't like the translation. I like goat. I like flat out goat. Or wild goat. I would probably use the word wild goat, but definitely satyr and goat demon are a lot more exciting to imagine that goat demons are dancing around these places. I just can tell you that has a lot to do with the later Christian traditions of satyrs and Pan being the devil. So, and it's clearly not the devil. It's whatever it is. It's things that you don't want to have around, but they're not the devil. They're scary things, and definitely satyrs would have been scary, or things you don't want to deal with. But so would wild goats, so would owls, so would things that, hyenas, things that you didn't like. These are symbols of the destruction. But yeah, that's what we did to Pan. Or I didn't do it to Pan, but people who didn't like Pan did it to Pan. I'm not asking for Pan to be brought back, by the way. I'm not advocating for a resurgence of Pan worship, but it was very popular. And by the way, we do believe that there were human sacrifices done at Panyas at those springs as well. So just to make it really clear, I definitely don't want it to come back. But Pan was given a really bad rap by early Christian fighters against paganism and these spirit worship folk.
Have they found archaeological evidence of sacrifices at Banya?
Yes. And that's why like you got to be careful, because on one hand you want to say like, well, there's nothing wrong with a little Pan worship, and on the other hand you got to say, well, yeah, but Pan worship oftentimes had some pretty funky stuff associated with it. The word bacchanal comes from the kind of Dionysian rites that included ideas of drinking and going nuts, and if not getting a satyr or invoking a satyr into your midst, definitely hoping that kind of behavior happens. There were a couple pretty bizarre episodes of what's it called, True Blood, that brought back some of the bacchanalian rites that were popular during the Greco-Roman period. And again, you can understand why it seemed like they were fun, but definitely were not. We have to be careful, because again, we don't ever want to say somebody's worship was bad, but if the rites included human sacrifice and ritual or cultic forced prostitution, I think most people would say, let's not go back to that. Let's not bring that back. So, yeah, that is, it's part of what we deal with when we kind of go back and try to reread history. Yeah, but we're not done. We're not done with this stuff yet, by the way. That's the end. That's the pronouncement. The chapter's not quite over. Here's
Rabbi,
another.
I
Yeah,
have one more follow-up
yeah,
question.
yeah.
And if you or anyone in the conversation can address it, I haven't done a deep dive on the Balfour Declaration,
Yeah.
right? But you're talking about, what has happened in the last 100 years as almost payback, right? Not payback, but as seen in Isaiah, right?
Yep.
So my question is, do you happen to know any more about the decision behind the Balfour? I've read it, but haven't done a super deep dive into it. Was it the Brits' way of not reimagining, but saying, hey, it's already been stated in Isaiah, so we're going to deal with it now in 2017, whatever it was, 1402, I forget.
Yeah, no, those were all in the 1920s. The white paper and the Balfour Declaration, it was 1919. The reality is that there was definitely a strand of Anglo-Zionism that was based on early Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism, to some extent, took off much faster in Britain than it did in America, maybe because Britain wound up with Israel, right? With Palestine was part of their territory, so maybe that's why it was. But there were several Christian groups and ministers that got wrapped up into that. And I think what's interesting about it too is that part of it has to do with the fact that the Protestant, not even the Reformation, but the Cromwell's, Oliver Cromwell, when he overturned the monarchy and when there was the Civil War, the English Civil War that did away with the monarchy, and again, monarchy was killed and exiled, and Cromwell took over. They were somewhat, I mean, not somewhat, they were religious. They were very religious people, the Roundheads and the struggle against the monarchy at the time had a religious component to it. And that was about those are the late 1600s, early 1700s. Interestingly, Cromwell was the person who let the Jews come back to Britain. And so there was this strand of British Zionism and to some extent British philo-Semitism, which allowed for Jews to come back to England after being exiled for 300 years. And it allowed and continued this kind of almost messianic, to some extent, Cromwell saw himself almost in a messianic way of bringing back, bringing back a kingdom of God. And so these were Puritans and Puritan descendants and the English. Look, I mean, it was an interesting time where religion and politics got fused, and I think it really affected England for the next couple hundred years. American Christian Zionism really didn't become a big force until after World War II. It existed. There were definitely American versions of that British Zionism, but it was not as big in America as it was in England. And there's an interesting dude you can research about, Lloyd George, who was a convert to Judaism, who it was almost messianic, there was definitely a strand from the probably again late 1600s, 1700s until the 1900s in England, where there was almost kind of a messianic fervor when it came to Jews and it came to Israel, and to some extent led to some British support for Israel, which, again, Churchill didn't approach it so much from a religious standpoint, but there was definitely that strand. So yeah, it's an important thing to think about, John, is that people did read the Bible. They did read, they were reading the Bible, passages like Isaiah, and we'll see when we get to Jeremiah and Ezekiel and some of these prophets that had religious and political kinds of statements to make. And when they had the power during that time, the British were up until the 1940s, the British Empire ruled the world, and there was a messianic level of, there was a tendency. There's also a counter tendency in Britain for people to be very pragmatic and to try to rule the empire in an effective way, which meant, hey, let's not forget the Arabs control a lot more land, or potentially there's a lot more Arabs. And that did not bear well for the Jews either, because then there was the counter to the Balfour Declaration, the white paper, which restricted Jewish immigration and restricted the growth of Israel. So there were also some very deep-rooted anti-Semites in Britain as well, and also, some people would say a more pragmatic approach to running diplomacy, which led to Jews being locked out of Palestine during the British Mandate. So, it's difficult to say, which side in the end ran out. Or, I mean, who knows? I mean, the British abstained when it came to the vote on the United Nations mandate. Britain passed. They took a diplomatic abstention on it. So that's part of history. Britain did not vote.
There always was a British strategy, which it just doesn't get pointed out a lot. But their strategy over their whole empire was to take a minority and make them the ruling class.
Yeah.
And they tried to do it with the Jews, but then the Jews didn't want to remain a minority and depended on the British.
Well, yeah, and you're absolutely right, Rosemary. I mean, the British did that in India. They did it in
India. They did it in Jordan.
They did it in South Asia. They did it with the Hashemite. Absolutely, and our tour guide in Jordan actually pointed that out, that the Hashemite dynasty was a small group that they did, and they did it everywhere.
They tried to do it in America.
Yes, and it wasn't just the British that did it. Other Europeans.
Of course, I'm not saying that there was only a British strategy, but it was their strategy.
Yes, and so this was one of the strategies that the British employed, and I will say this too: there were definitely in all fairness, there were also Zionists, including people like even Theodore Herzl, but people like Martin Buber and some of the early Zionist thinkers who really did not want to have. They wanted a cooperative relationship with the Arab citizens, and really didn't expect for there to be the type of power, unitary power of Jews over the land. So I will just tell you, there were Jews who felt uncomfortable with it and didn't want to be put in that situation either. So, in all fairness, there were actually Jewish intellectual, primarily European Jewish intellectuals who didn't feel comfortable with that. So, I will say, and again, Buber and some of the circle of Jews in Israel, in pre-state Israel, were didn't want to have that. So yes, it was a British. It was a part of their strategy too. Anyways, so this is definitely relevant for history and how people would have this played out. So let's continue with. There's some more. I mean, this is kind of like a pause because it's not the end. Because here's what it says:
"And I will make it a home of bitterns, pools of water. I will sweep it with a broom of extermination, declares the Lord of hosts."
Yeah, and just so you know, it says the meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Bitterns is usually the word that's used here for kipod. Does anyone have another translations besides bitterns? Anybody? No? Okay.
Just like the broom of extermination. It sounds like something from a comic book.
Okay, but does everyone know what a bittern is?
Yeah, it's a water bird.
Yeah, it's not exactly the broom of extermination. If I show you what a bittern looks like, it's kind of an interesting. It's an interesting.
My translation is hedgehog.
See, there we go. I knew there was other translation. I just want to show you that the bittern does not look like an agent of destruction. There's a bittern.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a heron related.
That's not a hedgehog.
No, it's a medium-sized heron. Anyways, not exactly something you're going to be scared of, but I guess the cognate of it was enough so that people thought it was, you know, indicative of what happens after something has been laid waste to. That
Well,
bitter-
it's a bird, it said in the little thing that you showed, the bird that waits and stalks for its prey. So they're saying this is a deserted place where a bittern could.
Yeah,
that
exactly. So
strategy.
the bitterns are what's left.
Mhm.
You know, are yeah, they're not carrion birds. They're not like vultures.
No,
Like-
they're not vultures, but they're birds of,
Yeah,
they're birds that hunt, and they hunt by stealth. So they're saying, you know, this is not a place where humans are coming down to get their water and stuff.
correct. Yeah, and it's just not like, you don't say, "Hey, the broom of extermination with those little cute birds." But anyways, yes, the purpose is to tell you that there's devastation here. This is not a good place to live anymore.
The Lord of hosts has sworn this oath, as I have designed, so shall it happen. What I have planned, that shall come to pass. To break Assyria in my land, to crush him on my mountain, and his yoke shall drop off them, and his burden shall drop from their backs. That is the plan that is planned for all the earth. That is why an arm is poised over all the nations. For the Lord of hosts has planned, who then can foil it? It is his arm that is poised, and who can stay it? This pronouncement was made in the year that King Ahaz died.
Yeah. So before we get to that, this one just brought in the Assyrians too. So you're like, well, wait, is this a different pronouncement? Is this is this a part of a different pronouncement? Because this pronouncement seems to be about the Assyrians, but either it's telling us the Assyrians, this is what happened to the Assyrians as well, or and that's why it's going to happen to Babylonia, or again, that's a different pronouncement. This is well, you can say this is a pronouncement that comes out here towards the end of chapter 14.
Rejoice not, all Philistia, because the staff of him that beat you is broken. For from the stalk of a snake there sprouts an asp, a flying seraph branches out from it. The firstborn of the poor shall graze, and the destitute lie down secure. I will kill your stock by famine, and it shall slay the very last of you. Howl, O gate, cry out, O city, quake, all Philistia, for a stout one is coming from the north, and there is no straggler in his ranks. And what will he answer the messengers of any nation? That Zion has been established by the Lord. In it, the needy of his people shall find shelter.
Yeah, and there we just threw in the Philistines in there too. Why? Because again, the Philistines in some cases took over and were able to benefit from the Babylonian or Assyrian or other nations going to war against us. The Philistines would capitalize on that and move into our territory from their established cities along the coast. And so here the Philistines get singled out as well for a pronouncement, which is don't think that you're going to get away with this either. You are going to eventually be destroyed too. So the Philistines were destroyed. The Philistines disappear. Their name doesn't disappear, which is why we have the word Palestine. But the Philistines themselves as a people are destroyed. The Palestinians are not descendants of the Philistines, don't consider themselves descendants of the Philistines. The land was named Philistia after the destruction of Judea. The Romans wanted to punish the Jewish people by taking away the name of their country. And so instead of naming it, again, anything like Judea or Israel, they named it after the Philistine people who had been living there in part of the country. And that's why it's called Palestine to this day, based on the Roman name and then the later names that were used by the Arabs, by the all the way up through the Ottoman Empire and through the British Empire, that the name Palestine stuck. The Philistines were long gone by the time of the Roman, by the Roman period. They're already ancient history. The name stuck. Now, after dealing with the Philistines a little bit, tiny little bit, after again, then before that, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, now we move to the Moabites, who are nowhere near as powerful as pretty much any of them. The Moabites, again, are the descendants, according to the Bible, of Lot and his daughter. Lot and his daughter, that's exactly right what I said, Lot and his daughter. After the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, that's how Moab was created. It's in modern day Jordan. And that country, the area of Moab, is where Ruth was from. And Ammon, the Ammonites above them, that's where the city of Ammon is today, is Ammon. Moab is below that. So when we were in Wadi Rum and when we were in Petra before, we were in the Moabite country. By the time of Petra and the Nabateans, Moabites were long gone. They had been supplanted by the Idumeans, the Edomites, who had moved up from the south. And then even the Idumeans had kind of been overrun by the Nabateans, who were Arab people from further to the east of Yemen. So that's all going on in Jordan. Again, Moab, not a friend of, related to us, but oftentimes at war with us. We were oftentimes in charge of them. They were a vassal state to us from the time of King David all the way up through the kings. Occasionally we read about Mesha, the king of Moab, who revolts against the later Judean kings, Israelite kings. But like, nobody is a Moabite today, except for a little bit of us. Because Ruth is the great grandmother of King David. So anyone who's related to King David, including by that virtue or by that connection, even Jesus, has part Moabite blood, because anyone who is Davidic has a little bit of Moab in them. That's what the Bible tells us, what the book of Ruth says. So here's the pronouncement against Moab.
The Moab pronouncement. In the night Ar was sacked. Moab was ruined. In the night Kir was sacked. Moab was ruined. He went up to the temple to weep. Dibon went to the outdoor shrines over Nebo and Medeba. Moab is wailing. On every head is baldness. Every beard is shorn.
Yeah, and those are all cities in Moab. Nebo, Medeba. We passed through those people who were in Jordan with us a week and a half ago. We drove through these places. Nebo is a place where, according to tradition, Moses is buried by God. Dibon is right in that area too. These are all areas in kind of the southern half of the bottom part of Jordan. The northern part of it would be where Ammon is, and all the way up to the border on the other side, Syria on Jordan. That was Ammon and Aram. So again, the Moabites would sometimes fight against us, especially during the time of the Babylonians. The Assyrians, they would take advantage of our weakness and come in and sack and raid our country. That's why they get punished.
In its streets, they are girt with sackcloth. On its roofs, in its squares, everyone is wailing, streaming with tears. Heshbon and Elah cry out. Their voice carries to Yahaz. Therefore, the shock troops of Moab shout. His body is convulsed. My heart cries out for Moab. His fugitives flee down to Zoar, to Eglat Shalishia, for the ascent of Luhith. They are sent with weeping. On the road to Horonaim, they raise a cry of anguish. The waters of Nimrim are become a desolation. The grass is sere, the herbage is gone, vegetation is vanished. Therefore, the gains they have made and their stores they carry to the Wadi of Willows. The cry has compassed the country of Moab, all the way to Eglaim, her wailing, even at Be'er Elim, her wailing. Ah, the waters of Dimon are full of blood, for I pour added water on Dimon. I drench it for Moab's refugees with soil for its remnant.
Yep. And so again, the call out of against Moab is throughout is referencing its cities. Again, Dimon, Eglaim. We can see all the places that are mentioned here in Moab. These are all references to their cities, to their places. And, you know, this destruction that happens to them is punishment. It's punishment for the fact that they went to war against us and they took advantage of, as we'll read later in Jeremiah and in some of the writings about the Babylonians, the Babylonian destruction. They took advantage of you know, of our weakness to come in and raid our country. So that's why the punishment is out there for them, for the Moabites. It's actually not quite over.
Dispatch as messenger the ruler of the land from Selah in the wilderness to the mount of fair Zion. Like fugitive birds, like nestlings driven away, Moab's villagers linger by the fords of the Arnon. Give advice, offer counsel. At high noon make your shadow like night. Conceal the outcasts. Betray not the fugitives. Let Moab's outcasts find asylum in you. Be a shelter for them against the despoiler. For violence has vanished, rapine is ended, and marauders have perished from this land. And a throne shall be established in goodness in the tent of David, and on it shall sit in faithfulness a ruler devoted to justice and zealous for equity.
So here's an interesting thing. Again, all these things that Moab did to us is going to be over when they're destroyed. But it says instead, a throne shall be established in goodness in the tent of David. And again, the fact that they single out not Judah, but actually say David, who we know is a descendant of the Moabites, that's an interesting twist, right? That's an interesting, oh yeah, you mean the guy who's part Moabite is going to be the one whose descendants, or we're invoking him as the one who is going to end that type of really bad behavior. A ruler devoted to justice and zealous for equity, which is a beautiful idea of what a ruler should do. You know, a throne established in goodness and chesed, loving kindness. So that is the vision of what would happen with regards to, again, well, bringing vengeance on the Moabites, but again, that there's on the other side justice and equity.
We have heard of Moab's pride. Most haughty is he, of his pride and haughtiness and arrogance, and of the iniquity in him. Ah, let Moab howl, let all in Moab howl. For the raisin cakes of Kir Hasaret, you shall moan most pitifully. The vineyards of Heshbon are withered, and the vines of Sibmah. Their tendrils spread to Baala Goim and reached to Jazer and strayed to the desert. Their shoots spread out and crossed the sea.
So you can see that these are all places in Moab, Heshbon and Sibmah. You can see they have vineyards, they have, you know, they have good things there. And they're going to be destroyed. And so you can imagine, you know, a Moabite prophecy against us that would have talked about, you know, the Galilee or the hills of Judea. This is the way we describe them. And these are the places that they're going to have destroyed.
Therefore, as I weep for Jazer, so I weep for Sibmah's vines, O Heshbon and Elealeh. I drench you with my tears, Ended are the shouts over your fig and grain harvests. Rejoicing and gladness are gone from the farmland. In the vineyards, no shouting or cheering is heard. No more does the treader tread wine in the presses. The shouts have been silenced. Therefore, like a lyre, my heart moans for Moab, and my very soul for Kir-Heres. And when it has become apparent that Moab has gained nothing in the outdoor shrine, he shall come to pray in his temple, but to no avail. That is the word that the Lord spoke concerning Moab long ago. And now the Lord has spoken. In 3 years, fixed like the years of a hired laborer, Moab's population with all its huge multitude shall shrink. Only a remnant shall be left of no consequence.
Yeah. So the Moabites are going to be they're going to be destroyed. They're going to be victims of themselves. And so the destruction that they were responsible for, they're going to be destroyed. There definitely seems to be a familiarity with Moab and a kind of admiration and love for the country. You know, it's right across the Jordan River, and it seems as though, again, Isaiah, the writer, the text seems to have an appreciation for the land and a knowledge of the land that is respectful and is to some extent, you know, wistful at the destruction that is going to be visited on the Moabites. There seems to be this recognition that, yeah, this is kind of sad, but it's due them. So that is the Moabites. Those chapters are about the Moabites. Now we get to Damascus, but specifically, again, the Arameans, as a people, Damascus is their capital, the capital of Aram. Damascus, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Jericho, by the way, being another one of them, in the sense that we have archaeological evidence that goes back thousands of years in these cities, continuously inhabited cities. Let's read, shall we?
The Damascus pronouncement. Behold, Damascus shall cease to be a city. It shall become a heap of ruins.
Okay, let's pause right there. It did not cease to become a city. I mean, it did not cease to be a city. Still a city to this day. Ironically, a couple of years ago, it wasn't just a city, it was also a heap of ruins. Interesting. So, yeah, it's still a city. And it's a city that has been victimized by civil war. And unfortunately now, not so much even the destruction in Damascus, but throughout the region just a couple of weeks ago. So, again, Damascus has continuously been inhabited, never stopped being a city. During the Umayyad dynasty, it was the capital of the Muslim world, right? It was not Saudi Arabia. When the Arabs came out of Mecca and Medina and eventually, you know, conquered most of the Middle East, they didn't make their capital in Mecca or Medina. They made their capital in Damascus. So, yeah, later on, there was another Arab capital in Baghdad. Different dynasties used different cities. Later on, Cairo becomes a capital. But there was a time that Damascus, about 1,000 years ago, was the major city at crossroads of the entire world. So it did not cease to be a city, at least then, because it came back. So it was definitely destroyed by the Babylonians, and then we read about it in the Bible, actually, and then by the Persians. And then later on, by the way, Damascus was even attacked by the Mongol armies. The Mongols came through Damascus in the 1300s. So Damascus has seen many, many, many battles, many bad days, including 2017. It was huge parts of Damascus were reduced to rubble, to a heap of ruins. So again, when does this prophecy, is it still out there? Yeah, this is when it was the capital of Aram, of our northern neighbor.
The towns of Aroer shall be deserted. They shall be a place for flocks to lie down with none disturbing. Fortresses shall cease from Ephraim, and sovereignty from Damascus. The remnant of Aram shall become like the mass of Israelites, declares the Lord of hosts.
Now that's really weird. Because just now, Isaiah just laid out that Ephraim and Damascus are like one and the same. Why? Because we read in the time of Isaiah, prophet, Syria and Ephraim, the north, the Israelites, waged war against Judah. So in his mind, they're like a dual evil empire. And they're both going to be destroyed, Aram and the Israelites. So it's kind of weird that they are lumped here together, but it doesn't really surprise us when we read earlier in Isaiah that the Syrian and the Israelites are going to be destroyed in the prophecies that we already read. It actually said so when we talked about that boy, that child that was going to rule. It said by the time he's old enough to know right from wrong, Syria and Israel will be destroyed. So they didn't like, the Judites did not like these people, and they lumped them together. These were Israelites. We just said Israel. But they Israel. What's that?
In that day, the mass of Jacob shall dwindle, and the fatness of his body become lean. After being like the standing grain harvested by the reaper, who reaps ears by the armful, he shall be like the ears that are gleaned in the valley of Rephaim. Only gleanings shall be left of him, as when one beats an olive tree, 2 berries or 3 on the topmost branch, 4 or 5 on the boughs of the crown, declares the Lord, the God of Israel.
Wow. So Israel is going to be punished like Syria, maybe because of Syria. And yeah, there's not going to be a lot of them left. Leanings will be left of them. Like after you hit a tree and all the olives come off and maybe there's a couple left. All the other ones are done. They're all gathered up.
In that day, men shall turn to their Maker. Their eyes look to the Holy One of Israel. They shall not turn to the altars that their own hands made, or look to the sacred posts and incense stands that their own fingers wrought. In that day, their fortress cities shall be like the deserted sites which the Horesh and the Emir abandoned because of the Israelites. And there shall be desolation.
And again, when you look at this note, the Amorites and the Hivites, the Canaanite peoples that we destroyed when we came into the land with Moses and Joshua, right? And we destroyed those Amorites and Hivites. So again, as much as it's against Aram, this also is against the Israelites, against the northern kingdoms, who, by the way, as we know, they had these things right here. They had altars.
Mark,
Yes.
there's no mention of Amalek, is there?
No, I don't think there's one mention of Amalek in Isaiah's text. I'm not 100% sure right now. I don't think so, though. No. By this period, Amalek is not a force to be reckoned with. By the time of the Babylonian, they're not even recognized as a they're not even recognized as a historical entity. Interestingly, Sodom and Gomorrah were referenced. The the Canaanites are referenced here. So it's not like they couldn't reference an old people. I don't think Amalek's mentioned once. Not 100% sure, but I don't think it is. Yep.
Truly, you have forgotten the God who saves you and have not remembered the rock who shelters you. That is why, though you plant a delightful sapling, what you sow proves a disappointing slip. On the day that you plant, you see it grow. On the morning you sow, you see it bud. But the branches wither away on a day of sickness and mortal agony.
You see?
Ah, the roar of many peoples that roar as roars the sea, the rage of nations that rage as rage the mighty waters, nations raging like massive waters. But he shouts at them, and they flee far away, driven like chaff before wind in the hills, and like tumbleweed before a gale. At eventide, lo, terror. By morning it is no more. Such is the lot of our despoilers, the portion of them that plunder us.
Wow. Why? Why would they even be included in that? Because Israel went to war against us. Yeah. So that is a horrible thing that the Israelites of the northern kingdom had done to us. And I'm just seeing if Amalek is mentioned anywhere in Isaiah, and I do not see Amalek mentioned one time in Isaiah. No, it doesn't seem to be. Nope. All right. It's a good question though, Judah, by this time. So let's continue, because this is not it's not over really, this prophecy.
Ah, land in the deep shadow of wings, beyond the rivers of Nubia. Go, swift messengers, to a nation far and remote, to a people thrust forth and away, a nation of gibber and chatter, whose land is cut off by streams, which sends out envoys by sea in papyrus vessels upon the water. All you who live in the world and inhabit the earth, when a flag is raised in the hills, take note. When a ram's horn is blown, give heed. For thus the Lord said to me, I rest calm and confident in my habitation, like a scorching heat upon sprouts, like a rain cloud in the heat of reaping time. For before the harvest, yet after the budding, when the blossom is hardened into berries, he will trim away the twigs with pruning hooks and lop off the trailing branches. They shall all be left to the kites of the hills and to the beasts of the earth. The kites shall summer on them, and all the beasts of the earth shall winter on them. In that time, tribute shall be brought to the Lord of hosts from a people far and remote, from a people thrust forth and away, a nation of gibber and chatter, whose land is cut off by streams, at the place where the name of the Lord of hosts abides, at Mount Zion.
Yeah, and so you can see that there's a lot of description about these destructions. You can see description in terms of the flora, the fauna, the beauty of the mountains, of the waters. All of the natural features are invoked, and all of this destruction is kind of then matched in the background, though we're not seeing it enough today. We'll see it more and more in the future. That destruction is also coupled with a restoration. of us. Mount Zion, Har Zion, Jerusalem, Judah, the kingdom. So the destruction of other peoples and the restoration of us. We're going to read one more, and then I've got to run. But we're going to read the pronouncement against Mitzrayim, against Egypt. This is an interesting one too, because again, we know the Egyptians were at sometimes very powerful and other times not so powerful. See if you can see where you think Egypt was during the time of Isaiah based on this pronouncement.
The Egypt pronouncement. Mounted on a swift cloud, the Lord will come to Egypt. Egypt's idols shall tremble before him, and the heart of the Egyptians shall sink within them. I will incite Egyptian against Egyptian. They shall war with each other, every man with his fellow, city with city, and kingdom with kingdom. Egypt shall be drained of spirit, and I will confound its plans. So they will consult the idols and the shades and the ghosts and the familiar spirits. And I will place the Egyptians at the mercy of a harsh master, and a ruthless king shall rule them, declares the sovereign, the Lord of hosts.
And again, you can see that Egyptians are going to be doomed to civil war. They're going to be doomed to their weird supernatural stuff, which sometimes we admire or in awe of, and other times we basically think they're crazy. I mean, well, you can do both actually. You can both think that they're powerful and also weird and wrong. And again, idols and shades, right? Ghosts, spirits, necromancy. And again, putting them underneath a tough taskmaster, of course, harkens back to what they did to us. Now they're going to get it. And again, what do we see? Of course, a description of Egyptian waterworks, which are always very impressive.
Water shall fail from the seas, rivers dry up and be parched, channels turn foul as they ebb, and Egypt's canals run dry. Reed and rush shall decay, and the Nile papyrus by the Nile side, and everything sown by the Nile shall wither, blow away, and vanish. The fishermen shall lament, all who cast lines in the Nile shall mourn, and those who spread nets on the water shall languish. The flax workers too shall be dismayed, both carders and weavers chagrined.
So what you see here, and again, this is one of the wonderful things about what we're seeing today, is that as Isaiah surveys our neighbors, the neighbors of the kingdom of Judah, both to the north, the west, the south, every direction, east, everyone's incorporated here. The Egyptians, the Philistines, the Syrians, I haven't gotten to everybody, but you see what the countries look like too. You see that there's vines and shepherds working in Moab. You see that here in the Nile area in Egypt, you see fishermen working, you see flax workers, you see people who are weaving, you see people who are doing papyrus. You can see what's going on in these countries. So Isaiah actually gives us a vision of what life was like economically, socially for these countries. And so he kind of gives us an insight of like what these countries look like then, or at least what we saw when we looked at these people.
Her foundations shall be crushed, and all who make dams shall be despondent. Utter fools are the nobles of Tanis. The sagest of Pharaoh's advisors have made absurd predictions.
I want to go to the store.
How can you say to Pharaoh, I am a scion of sages, a scion of Kedemite kings? Where indeed are your sages? Let them tell you. Let them discover what the Lord of hosts has planned against Egypt. The nobles of Tanis have been fools, the nobles of Memphis deluded. Egypt has been led astray by the chiefs of her tribes. The Lord has mixed within her a spirit of distortion, which shall lead Egypt astray in all her undertakings, as a vomiting drunkard goes astray. Nothing shall be achieved in Egypt by either head or tail, palm branch or reed. In that day the Egyptians shall be like women, trembling and terrified, because the Lord of hosts will raise his hand against them. And the land of Judah shall also be the dread of the Egyptians. They shall quake whenever anybody mentions it to them, because of what the Lord of hosts is planning against them.
So they'll be scared even of us, the Egyptians. Again, you can see that all the things that they are normally known for, their magic, their sages, all that means nothing now. All that means nothing.
In that day, there shall be several towns in the land of Egypt, speaking the language of Canaan and swearing loyalty to the Lord of hosts. One shall be called Town of Heres. In that day, there shall be an altar to the Lord inside the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. They shall serve as a symbol and reminder of the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt, so that when the Egyptians cry out to the Lord against oppressors, he will send them a savior and a champion to deliver them. For the Lord will make himself known to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians shall acknowledge the Lord in that day, and they shall serve him with sacrifice and oblation, and shall make vows to the Lord and fulfill them.
Basically, it says the Egyptians are going to become Jewish. Judeans, they're going to literally worship our God. They're going to cry out to Adonai against their oppressors, which is exactly what we did when we were there. That's the exact same words. Moses was told by God at the burning bush, I have heard the cry of my people in the land of Egypt. And now the Egyptians are going to be crying out, and I will send them a savior and a champion. It says, I'm going to send them a Moses. That's amazing. And that Moses is going to lead them to God. That's what's going to happen to the Egyptians. That's crazy. By the way, it says right here that there will be it says right here that there will be people in the land speaking Hebrew and swearing loyalty to God, and that there will be an altar to the Lord inside the land of Egypt. And we uncovered it. It was in the farthest south part of the kingdom, Elephantine in Egypt, by the Aswan Dam, where the Aswan Dam is today in Aswan. There was an altar to God that was uncovered on Elephantine Island, built by Jewish mercenaries who were placed there during the Babylonian times. 100% happened. We discovered it. We know it's there. It's been archaeologically uncovered. There was an altar to God at that place. Not quite exactly the way Isaiah says it's going to happen, but it's pretty interesting that at least that part happened. And that, what does it say about them?
The Lord will first afflict and then heal the Egyptians. When they turn back to the Lord, he will respond to their entreaties and heal them. In that day there shall be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. The Assyrians shall join with the Egyptians, and the Egyptians with the Assyrians, and then the Egyptians together with the Assyrians shall serve the Lord. In that day, Israel shall be a third partner with Egypt and Assyria as a blessing on earth. For the Lord of hosts will bless them, saying, Blessed be my people Egypt, my handiwork Assyria, and my very own Israel.
Wow.
That
That is an amazing vision of a highway that goes across the Middle East, that goes across the Fertile Crescent. We have to leave there, but that's a very hopeful idea that one day, it hasn't happened yet, there will be a highway.
There was a train for a while, wasn't there?
There was. During the British Mandate, there was a train. It went right through, and now it doesn't go because it stops at the border of Lebanon. But yes, there was a train that went across the Middle East. Yeah, a very small window of when that happened, from about 1920 to about 1940. There was a there was a highway, a connector, but it wasn't a connector of the countries. It was a connector of the British Empire, and by the way, the French, because it also went through Lebanon, and into Syria. But this idea that there would be a tripartite relationship between Egypt, Israel, and Assyria is an amazing vision. That there would literally be a relationship with those countries that would literally connect the Middle East. Look, we're not there yet, but we hope that we'll be there one day. I have to run. Rosemary, thank you so much for reading today, and thank you everybody for reading the pronouncements. I promise that we're going to be moving into some of the more famous parts of Isaiah in a moment, in the coming weeks. But again, this was the pronouncements. And an important part of Isaiah are these pronouncements against these other nations and against the enemies of Israel, who one day are in the Jewish people in Judea, which will hopefully one day be our friends. We still hope that that'll be the case. Not quite there yet. Take care, everybody. Have a good rest of the week and stay dry. Stay
Thank
healthy.
you. Bye, everybody.
Everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.